Hey everybody, we're back for another episode of Folk US Americana. This time we're at in Nyack, New York, just off the highway in a wonderful hotel, the Hotel Nyack, and Joe C. and his gang have been real helpful for us here. And I have the wonderful pleasure today of speaking to an old friend of mine, dear friend of mine, real good buddy. He is a singer-songwriter, activist, producer, and all-around friggin' great guy. And I want to welcome you, Mr. Joe Durso.
Good to see you, Tom.
Good to see you, Joe.
Hello, everyone.
Joe, I'm really thankful for you to take the time out here to make this happen. When I conceived of this program, I've thought of people like you who are not only musicians, but producers and people who do make things happen. And that's not to say that other musicians who don't do that is a bad thing. It's just I always admire people who can wear different hats. And you wear as many hats as I can conceive of. And I want to start right from the beginning of how you got your start and when did you say music was going to be how I made my living?
Interesting question. Thank you. Thanks for having me. So I first started in the music business in 1996. Excuse me, 1986. I came out of college. I was working for Premier Talent Agency for Barry Bell.
That was your first job out of college?
Frank, Barcelona. I showed up one day. Someone got fired the day before I showed up. They said, "Do you know how to type?" I said, "Yeah." Next week I started. And all of a sudden I was working for the Ramones and the Smithereens, my first two bands. And then within a year and a half I was working on tours for Bruce Springsteen, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, U2, Bon Jovi, Van Halen. It was insane. But around that time what happened was I started to then go to Greenwich Village. I was always a writer. I taught myself how to play guitar.
You taught yourself?
Yeah.
Self-taught?
Yeah, self-taught. And I went to schools my whole life that had no music programs, so I had to be a self-taught musician. And then 1989, started a band called Three Chords and the Truth, because that's about all I knew was three chords. In fact, I have two publishing companies, Three Chords and the Truth and Four Chords and the Truth. So I try to write most songs with 6 chords if I can, but it doesn't have to be. It just has, listen, all you need is a great mentor like John Prine or Tom Petty to teach you. You don't need more than 3. It's where you put those 3. So that's going to Greenwich Village, and then during the day working for these rock stars. It was a great learning experience, and started the band in '89, and it's still, though we switched to the name Stone Caravan 6 months later, I've had the same band name now for 31 years.
Where does Stone Caravan come from?
It came from 2 things. One of our band members at the time said, we were throwing all sorts of names around like The Flood, and I wanted The Flood. And then one band member said, "No, it reminds me of the flood of Elmira in '72 or something." And then one guy came up with Caravan of Stone. And I liked it because it reminded me of, I'm a big Van Morrison fan, and on the early Van Morrison record, Moondance, there's Caravan and it's Stone Me. And I thought, oh, Stone Caravan. And I kind of, not that we ever sounded like it, but Led Zeppelin, Stone Caravan, it's something that should move, that's heavy.
Right.
And I thought, all right, I like that, and that's what we went. And we were Stone Caravan for the first 2 records.
Now, is caravan a reference to the British word for an RV?
No, it's not. I didn't know that till I started touring the UK in '99 or 2000. And I kept on hearing, oh, caravans, yeah, we love caravans. I'm like, to me, it was almost like a Mideastern or Egyptian or a nomadic word, the caravans going through.
The camels,
Exactly, and then when I realized that it was a trailer or a camper, it was a caravan, it was a revelation. But I think the Brits liked the name of our band, Stone Caravan, because of that. To them, it almost represented maybe something that they would be parked by the sea, but it was a little bit more firm because it was stone.
Right.
And we started that band in And on the third record, we switched it from Stone Caravan. My brother-in-law, who was my partner at the time, said, "Hey, you're writing all the songs, you're singing this. We should put your name out front." So that's when it became Joe Durso and Stone Caravan.
So you started out really as a DIY, as a do-it-yourself entity. You have not been signed to a outside record deal in the 30 years that you've been making music.
I've had licensing deals, and I've had major label deals fall apart. I've danced the dance. I became another one of the stories of all those stories we've heard about people's deals falling apart. I've had that, but no, I never have a release on a major label. So I've done everything, and the reason was early on we just weren't good enough, in all honesty. So I put out records on my own, and then by the time we got good enough, which was by the third or fourth record, when we were entertaining deals, grunge hit, which I was, my style of music was not really what was being signed, and I just kept on playing more and more live in Europe to stay alive.
Your sound, I almost think of you as, because I know you so well, it's almost like a folk rock and roll, but not. It's an amalgam. It's almost like if you can consider Bruce Springsteen or Tom Petty folk rock and roll, singer-songwriter, storytelling rock and roll,
Right.
then you are in that vein.
We tend to say we're an Americana rootsy Jersey Shore rock and roll band, and that's a mouthful, but we represent all those different things. There was a time in the mid-'90s where I was trying to sound a little less Jersey Shore and more Midwestern, like the Bodines and the Replacements, these bands that I loved. But at the end of the day, man, listen, I love Pete Seeger, I love John Prine, I love the folkiness of Nebraska, of Springsteen, as well as the rock and roll stuff. So, you could either try and serve no masters or all masters, or just do what you think feels right. And that's the path I try to do. As long as the song, I've always tried to serve the song. If it's a good song, no matter how it comes out, go with that.
How did the de-evolution of the music business, of the failure of record companies and of the demise of certain independent radio, did it affect you much?
Sure. I worked in the business at a time when the first five, I would say my career in the major label agency was 86 to 96, those 10 years. So the first 5 years, I got a chance to really observe old school, the Larry Maggots of the world, and the Jerry Michelsons, and Bill Graham, and Louis Messina, and all of them exist to a certain degree, or an incredible degree to this day, but they own their own companies. And then what came in first was SFX, which then turned into Clear Channel, and predecessors of all of Live Nation at that point. And they came in and bought these folks out. And some of the presenters back then said, "Don't worry about it. That'll be gone in a couple of years, and we'll all be back," which wasn't the case, because Live Nation still exists. And I lamented the loss of personality. Like, there was different personalities, from a Rich Engler in Pittsburgh, Rick Franks out in Detroit, Wilson Howard down in the South, Louis Messina in Houston. And these guys were guys I really looked up to, these presenters, because part of them were really tremendous music lovers, but also I then realized later on they were crazy gamblers is what they were. I remember once saying to Louis Messina, whose business, he's now, I think, every Taylor Swift show or Ed Sheeran show in the United States, and he's been, I think, George Strait for years, and he's a tremendous presenter, promoter. And he was telling me a story about them going out on a riverboat gambling, and I was still very green at the time, and I said, "Oh, really? Do promoters like to gamble?" And he goes, "That's all we do is gamble." And it wasn't until later on, when I started presenting my own shows and festivals, like, that's what Louis was talking about.
Well, I know what he's talking about.
Yes, you do. And that's how you and I met. You calling the agents, Premier Talent Agency, when I was working for Barry Bell and Frank Barcelona, and you were looking to purchase something at the Tarrytown Music Hall.
Yeah.
As Twin Cloud Productions.
Yeah.
That's how we met on the phone.
Yeah, I remember that.
So you learned at the feet, literally at the feet of the masters of the music business, of the refined music business of the 80s and early 90s, to the amalgamation of all these companies under one umbrella, to where that company now only handles the top of the heap. The independent promoters have had a lot of trouble in being able to continue, being able to just buy acts, and also one of the things that Louis Messina and all these other guys did is they did develop talent. So you, on your roster of Premier Talent, had up-and-coming acts like Suzanne Vega, who the agency, in partnership with the promoters, said, okay, we're going to make Suzanne Vega a viable, commercially selling act of tickets.
Right.
This has nothing to do with the artistic integrity of the artist. It's the how to make an artist be a commercial entity, successful for every player in the game.
But there was a very cohesive force going on at the time. And when I say cohesive, I mean there was management and artists as being one entity. You had the agency as another entity, and you had the record company, and they all worked together. And then obviously when MTV and VH1 came around, so you had everyone working towards the same goal, which was getting this music out there. Now, some people would call it music, some people would call it product. I always hated that word, but whatever it was, the end result was, how do we get this song, this record to the masses? And that was the goal of most artists. You work so hard writing those songs, you work so hard arranging them, thinking you had something great, and you wanted to get out there. So, and that's why you had a manager, an agent, and a record company to get these out there. Selling millions of records and becoming wealthy was an afterthought. It was first, hey, can I really even make a living from my music? And then the whole thing gets going. And I don't think anyone ever says, hey, we're going to buy this because we're going to make $1 million from it, until it's so far down the line. When those acts are up and coming, there's still a belief in an artist right there, or a belief in the agent or the manager.
There was a whole level of trust that the manager and the agent and the record company were only going to represent things that they felt, that they believed in,
right,
and that the artist believed in the team that they put together.
Right. So someone like a Frank Barcelona and Barbara Skydell and Barry Bell and Jane Garrity, the four people who are fronting Premier Talent, the head of, so they had a history of Santana, they had a history of Humble Pie, Led Zeppelin, Peter Frampton. So when and Bruce Springsteen from '78 on. So when the other artists started coming through, like the U2s and the Bon Jovis and the Talking Heads and the Pretenders, those promoters were going to trust that agency because everything else they brought up in the past had been successful. And I equate that to a great label back in the day, A&M Records. I always felt those had great artists. And a lot of those great artists also sold records too.
It's funny, I think back on an experience I had myself where I was a real big fan since I met her at a telethon in West Virginia. I was really enamored with the musical career of Kathy Mattea. And happened to go to Nashville and meet her manager, who was in an office the size of a large closet. And I kept saying to him, we need to get her up here in the Northeast. And I remember offering her $500 to be an opening act, and it never worked out to be that until one day Bob Titley, her manager, called me and says, So I want you to buy 2 dates with her for $5,000 a date. I'm like, Bob, we haven't even had her as an opening act for $500.
Right.
And he said, just trust me on this.
Yep.
Just trust me on this. So we ended up hiring her for 2 dates, $5,000 flat, and at the State Theater in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and at the Paramount Theater in Peekskill, New York.
How they do.
And about a month or so, 6 weeks before the dates really happened, a song of hers called "Where You Been" crossed over from the country charts to the AOR charts, and it was exploding all over the place. And of course, the Paramount Theater sold out, and in fact, which was a 1,000-seat theater, and the 1,800-seat theater in New Brunswick ended up doing, I don't know, 1,400 people. But I remember calling him when we saw that the Paramount Theater was going to sell out.
Right.
And I knew that in country music sometimes they would do matinees. And I called him up and I said, hey, do you want to add? And I remember when I booked the show, I said to him, I said, I'm going to do these 2 shows, Bob, and I'm going to hang on to my pants. And so I called him up about a week or 2 before the date. I said, you want to, the Paramount's going to go clean. Do you want to add a matinee and pick up, another 400 tickets? And he says, is this the same Tom Wilkie holding on to his pants?
There you go.
we had a good laugh about that, and I think back on that as something that was a real learning experience for me to really trust your gut.
Yeah.
Because the team is their team, the artist team is going to. Now, it could have just as easily gone south.
Sure. Now listen, there's been, for every 1,000 acts that have been successful, there's 1 million. There wouldn't be all those names on a roster of a record company and an agency if someone didn't believe in them at some point, or someone didn't think they were going to be successful. So it's really hard to determine. I remember when I got to Premier Talent Agency, there was a roster of about 80 artists on that roster, and as a kid I counted up, and there was something like 50-something out of those 80 that either sold out stadiums or arenas. It was mind-boggling. I mean, it was just like, oh my God, everyone. But there was still another 20 or 30 who were either developing or just kind of just never made it. And there was
who made those decisions ultimately at Premiere to say, okay, we're going to sign Suzanne Vega. I mean, Suzanne Vega's manager did not have success as an artist manager.
No, they have to. It always come down to the agent, the 2 main agents, and that was Frank and Barber. They were the ones. They had to sign off as the owners of that company. Frank being the primary, and so they would have to sign off because they had to believe, and also they would want the staff to feel like, hey, this is great. Like, not that we're twisting your arm to work on this artist's career. This is something that's going to happen. But there were times when they certainly signed artists that they were telling their agents, you're going to be working on this no matter what. This is something I believe in. Or as the years went by and careers went by, if you had an artist who had a manager who had 3 or 4 successful acts, and he came in with someone new, your loyalty was to sign that new act. And almost in the same way when we called up presenters, and I was selling what we call at that time baby bands. Those baby bands could have been the Smithereens, could have been the Bodines, could have been even the replacements to some of the guys who weren't really tied into the independent scene. And they had just done, Van Halen or Deep Purple. I'm like, what do you mean Smithereens? Who are these guys? And the agent would say, buy this from me. And I think what a lot of the agencies had were some of the muscle where you said, listen, I need you to take some of these baby bands, but coming down the pike shortly is the Hooters, bands that were selling millions of copies. Right. The Ramones, who always.
I remember that of calling Premiere and being told basically, you can start by taking our baby acts and taking a risk and perhaps losing money before you get anything good from us.
And what I learned, and I hate to even equate this to something so merchandise, it'd be no difference than Frito-Lay, which has sold millions of bags of Lay's potato chips, coming out with a new product and turning to the biggest supermarket and say, well, you need to take this next thing because you've had success with the big ones.
Well, but from my point of view, I was being told, buy that new bag of chips before you even get a shot at Lay's.
Right, and that was the determining factor of who was going to be a real promoter, who's going to be here and gone tomorrow.
Right.
And they wanted to, I'm not saying things were a test, but they wanted to make sure someone was going to be around. And I saw certain promoters who were little guys who were given maybe some, not that it was ever a test per se, but unproven things, did okay, but stayed in the game and then got really big acts down the line. I think someone who's done incredibly well over the years, Evening Star Productions, Danny Zelisko, who's still a friend, he sometimes says, hey, thank you for trusting me on some of these early bands, and he stayed in the game and he became a big promoter.
Right.
But he was the little guy there for a while.
Let me bring this back to you. This is who we want to hear about. You set out on a course to create your own music, doing it your way, DIY, do it yourself, and did you ever? You mentioned that you had the opportunities where major label deals came and fell through. Did you ever look back and regret anything that came your way and said, if I had just done that one thing, maybe things would be different? Or are you proud of where you're at?
Good question. So I'm proud of, I left in '96. So I just released my 4th record. I was getting a lot of foreign press. And it was time, I was 32. I started there at 22. I was now 32. Fortunately, I think I still look a little bit younger at the time.
You still do.
And I started late in the game. So I didn't pick up guitar till I was 23, 24, started the band at 25. But now I'm 32, and I've turned down the agent gig a couple of times because I knew once you cross the aisle to become an agent, you couldn't be a singer-songwriter. So
you had the opportunity to perhaps be an agent at
no,
Premier.
I turned down the gig a few times, frankly.
Okay.
So and also, we were talking about things that you had the chance. When John Landau and Barbara Carr, Bruce Springsteen's managers, asked me to run that office. It was after the Tunnel of Express tour, which was '88. That was the first Bruce tour I worked on. They had me come up there one afternoon, and I told this to Barry Bell years later. They said, don't tell Barry, but come on up. Our longtime assistant, Denise Salisi, who used to work in the record plant, was leaving, and they wanted me to run that office. And they made me a fair offer. I wanted a few more dollars, but they made me a fair offer, and I didn't say no, because I knew once I walked through that door, and rightfully so, it was about Bruce Springsteen. And as much as I think the world of Bruce to this day, I wanted to do my career, not Bruce Springsteen's career.
Right.
It was years later I told Barry about that. He's like, I should have taken that gig. I said, yeah, and maybe Landau would have certainly helped me get a major label deal if my material was up to par. But I knew that working for Barry, once his work was done, I could book myself, I could travel, I could do different things, and I still needed to learn, because that happened 5 years before I left working for him, so it wasn't like towards the end there. So there's been a few times, and I once told that to Barbara Carr that, there was a couple of nights there in the late 90s, early 2000s, I'm touring around, I'm at a real crappy gig, and I questioned, like, oh, maybe I should have taken that offer. But after playing in 27 countries now, which I do fairly regularly still, at least 10 to 12 regularly, and putting out 14 records and having the experiences I've had, the friends I've had, all the different things, I know I made the right decision.
You adapted your life to be something that worked, and were able to figure it out, to adjust here and tweak there, to make your music be heard.
This is the one thing that I was very fortunate to this day, is when I get on stage and start performing, I'm able to close out every facet of my life, except that moment that I'm on stage performing. I'm no longer, a showbiz impresario. I'm working with Broadway folks, festivals, not-for-profit, all those different things. I'm able to shut that down and deliver that song to whatever this artistic performer part of my personality can. I'm able to shut that off, and that allows me to do what I do. If I didn't have that ability, and it's not a conscious thing I think about, it just happens, I don't think I could do that, because I would be thinking, oh, so-and-so's here, and I know them from another different walk of life, how they're perceiving me, but I don't care about that. I'm in that moment.
You're there to entertain.
Yeah.
Let me touch on that, because that's an interesting segue. You have an amazing career besides being a successful singer-songwriter, rock and roll folk person. Yes, we met when you were at Premiere, but then a couple of years later, you're working as my production chief on concerts that I'm putting on in Tarrytown, and wearing that hat.
And then going on to producing things yourself.
Which you were surprised I even wanted to do. I love being around shows. I love being around great talent.
I have to admit that when I called you and said, hey, you want to stage manage so-and-so concert?
I don't even remember who the first one was, but...
maybe Richard Thompson, or could have been David Bromberg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was always impressed that you went on to go and producing things, and you have an amazing heart for giving of the things that you believe in. You mentioned Pete Seeger earlier, and somebody you have not mentioned is Harry Chapin, and someone we have a love of in common. And you threw yourself wholeheartedly into these causes of what was originally World Hunger Year, now it's called Why Hunger, and helping with certain Clearwater things, and also helping an associate of Bruce Springsteen, a dear friend of Bruce Springsteen, with the Light of Day Foundation, and to the point where now you're on the board of the Light of Day Foundation. You're on the board of Why Hunger. How did that all come about in terms of you're the singer-songwriter, folky rocker guy? Yeah, I'll play your gig, and next thing you know, you're putting on the gig.
Yeah, it's kind of, when I sometimes step away and look back at it, I'm like, well, how the hell that all happened? I think it has to do with the fact that I have a personality trait that if I say I'm going to do something, I do it to completion, which is very simple. It's not very complicated. But we know there's a lot of times in life that people fall a little shy of that. They don't follow through. And I always say, it goes back to do what you say and say what you do. And the rest will take care of itself. So if I say we're going to put this concert together, and I've been fortunate that I've met a lot of really good people along the way, a lot of great musicians who will give up their time so I can get them involved in different things. Harry Chapin has been an incredible influence on my life. Not so much musically, though I'm sure some of my story songs have something to do with Harry, but just the fact that as I learned more about him, how involved he was with different theater groups and hunger issues, and just congressional, trying to get things changed in Washington. It's just, there are 24 hours in the day. You can get a lot done. And I always felt like, if you don't sell 10 million records, listen, if you can sell 10 million records or 20 million records, it's a lot easier to get certain things done because people will come out and see it. Well, the challenge is, if you don't sell that many records, how do you still get things done? So I learned how to delegate a little bit over the years and get other people involved. And the great thing about musicians is most musicians, I don't even love to think most people, but I'm going to go with most musicians want to help others. They really do, because the events allow them to do the one thing they normally love to do, sing and perform. I mean, musicians, no matter what happens when there's a crisis, out of any artists in the world, be it painters, be it actors, you name all the different walks of life, sculptors and artists. The one that gets asked to help out the most is a musician. Now, I believe, and I'll argue this till I'm blue in the face, the music is the most powerful art form in the world. It's the center of every religion. It's music. I mean, it is air, it is fire, it's earth, it's all those things.
Yeah.
So being able to use that as the conduit, and as the years went on, I would say the first 10 years of my career, I had the blinders on. I got to learn how to play guitar. I got to learn how to sing. I got to learn how to write songs. I got to get a record deal. I got to do this, and I did a lot in a very short period of time because I was so goal-oriented. But the second half of my career has been so much more interesting once I realized that an evening could have so much more value and weight when it just wasn't about buy my t-shirt and buy my CD. There's something else being tied into that night. And all those other doors of life, not just business, that opened up after that has been incredible. I mean, that's the reason I stayed in this world that I've somehow exist in or helped create or whatever it is. I've had many opportunities to jump more to a business side, and I've been tempted certainly more than once, but I think the humanities side of music and the music business or the live business or the charitable, whatever that thing is has been so much more appealing to me.
Well, I could talk to you for hours because you have such a fascinating career in terms of working with your dear old friend, Neil Berg, with his Broadway production and derivatives of his shows that he's put together and created.
Right.
And you've helped market and get out there in the world. You have an amazing talent for helping other musicians, whether you're getting them gigs in series locally or putting them on your the Light of Day tours that you put together for Europe and up in Canada, and the Light of Day Foundation, of course, helping with the research and study of Parkinson's disease.
Parkinson's, ALS, and PSP.
Yeah.
Those are three big. And my music manager, Bob Benjamin, who's the founder of Light of Day, along with Tony Pellegrossi and myself, starting that organization 21 years ago now. I think there was a great quote years ago that someone said, one of the great things about to help other people is there's no shortage on success. Someone else's success doesn't stop your own success. And I think a lot of times, someone else's success, and I think going back to you and I have a great love for folk music, and I tell the story every time I can, is I think one of the most incredible unselfish things that has ever existed was a gentleman by the name of Steve Goodman. When he was the opening act for Chris Christopherson, and Christopherson said, I got to get you a record deal, you're amazing. And Steve Goodman says, you think I'm great, you got to hear my friend John Prine. And takes Christopherson over to see John Prine after their show is done.
Right.
To me, that is one of the greatest stories of friendship or unselfishness that has ever existed. Because there's no short. His success was either one of them being successful was not going to hurt the other one's success.
Right.
Yeah. But you run into a lot of times in the music business. I've seen it, be it business people or entertainers, where people get very jealous, or that success thing gets the best of people, and you can't have that. Plus, also, I come from the school of every gig I've ever played outside the corner bar from Greenwich Village has been gravy. Going back to open mic night, if there was 20 of us, I was the last guy anyone thought was going to be successful. Without a doubt. If there was 20 picks, I was 21. But at the same time, but when everyone goes home, it's about the work you do by yourself.
Right.
Neil and I always have a thing we tell young performers: do the work.
That would be your suggestion to a 20-year-old Bob Dylan today?
Do the work. And what I tell young kids all the time is, do yourself a favor, your manager a favor, and your mother a favor, and write a hit song. I've never written a legitimate hit, but I've been fortunate to write 5 to 10 songs over the course of my career that allow me to travel around the world as a performer when people hire me because of these songs that they want to hear. And that is, that's magic. I mean, that's, I'm very fortunate when that happens.
Are you optimistic for the next 10 to 20 years of music? Not only for yourself, but in general of the music business, where do you see it evolving to?
Well, I have 2 kids. I have currently a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old. 17 is about to be 18. So I've been living with modern music for quite a long time in my household. It'll be very interesting seeing 10 years when stuff they're listening to is considered old school. Right now they're very new. Everything they do is new school. Listen, I do worry about young artists who rely on producers only, who rely on auto-tuning, who couldn't walk in, who may sell out arenas and have these big shows, but could not walk into this hotel or a club and carry off 1 hour of entertaining people with a piano or an acoustic guitar. Like really bringing it down to the basics. Yeah, you can argue, well, they don't have to. That's not their world. And I agree with that. That is not their world. But real talent is still real talent. And maybe one day that'll just be old school in the same way that a ragtime band was once considered the thing, or big band, or jazz, or rock and roll. I say right now, the rock and roll and or type of music I play, or rock musicians, are in the same predicament now that jazz and big band people were in the 60s, when they were looking like, who are these? These people really don't know how to play. That's how a lot of rock musicians feel about what's going on in the charts right now.
Guitar music will never make it.
Right.
Decca Records.
Right. So for years I'd say I don't exist in the music business. I exist in the live entertainment business. Because even though I sell maybe records on my own, it's not. No one's selling records anymore. It's Spotify. No one's getting paid on streaming. Unless you're at the top of that list. So for
that has to have a big effect on you.
Yeah. So for me to exist, I'm fortunate that, and there's other people in the same boat as me. When I put out CDs, there's still people who want to hear what the last 10 or 12 thoughts in line were, and they will pick that up. And people say, oh, no one listens to CDs anymore. Audiophiles do. I have 8 tracks, cassettes, LPs, and CDs. I listen to music.
78s.
Yeah, 78s. I listen to, I don't care where the source is, it's about what's what's coming out of those speakers.
Right.
Do I listen to tons of music? Of course, on my my iPad and my computer, but it doesn't mean it disappears. So, and that's the beauty of playing live, is that when people hear a song that affects them on a human level, they will most of the time go out and try and find it.
3 artists you've been listening to lately?
Well, during COVID, at times the only artist I was listening to was John Prine. John Prine got me through COVID. His humor, and there was a sadness with it because he died from COVID. But the humor in those songs, the humanity in those songs, I was then writing a whole bunch. I would have to say John Prine myself, because I wrote a lot during this last year and a half. I probably have 2 records ready to go. One with Stone Caravan, my rock and roll band, and my newest side project, Acoustic Excursion. I have a record ready to be recorded with them. And then the mixture of the third, it's funny, it's pretty even between old school. When I say old school, the Van Morrisons, the Tom Pettys, the Bruces of the world, and I do listen to a lot of newer stuff, but not hip hop. Not that I have anything against hip hop, it just doesn't work for me. Sometimes I hear stuff that I like, but I don't try and I got to immerse myself in it, because if I don't, I'm going to lose my relevance. I could argue I've never been relevant. So I just gotta, I have to do what works for me. So I do listen to a lot of newer artists. I do like Coffee House on XM Series because it's the stripped down version of some of these bands. But I love anyone who's got a great new song. I still love the feeling when I hear a new song and it just stops me. Like, I know that feeling. I know when I found, and recently I just found a Tom Waits song that has been around for 20 years. It's a lost cut on a record, and I felt that way. Like, all right, I've got one of those. Let's add this to the list. Yeah.
Well, Joe, I have to thank you for your incredible generosity and time you've given us here.
Oh, my pleasure.
And thank you for all the enlightened thoughts. It's really interesting to hear someone like yourself who is a musician, but also someone who is on the other side of the fence as the businessman. And you have been a great businessman for not only developing your own career, but helping others. And I admire that.
Thank you very much for saying that. There's a song that'll appear on one of my 2 new records called Fences, which I wrote years ago. It was about my sister knocking down certain fences in adolescence, which made my growing up easier. And I realize as I've gotten older now, the only way for me to exist is that on business or creativity, there are no fences. You're saying about the other side of the fence. To me, there is no fence. It's all just one big field, and let's go play. The reason they call it playing music, right?
Well, thank you so much,
Thank
Joe.
you, Tom.
Really
It's a pleasure.
appreciate having you here.
I love the fact that you have this series.
We're having fun with it. Folk USA Americana was just sort of my way of summing it up. It's a play on words of Focus Americana, and it was just something that I thought I want to explore what people are thinking as the business is evolving and changing, and how they are evolving and changing.
Yeah, and I think it'll always evolve and always change. That's just the nature of business and also the nature of people.
Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Folk US Americana. Take care. Bye-bye.